Danielle was packing her things to leave the inn when her phone rang. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. It was Anna's husband. His voice was ragged with confusion and regret. He said he needed to talk to her about Anna, about everything. For a moment, she thought it was some kind of sick joke. But as he spoke, she felt the old dread creeping up her spine. He told her Anna had confessed everything, finally breaking down in a drunken haze. How she'd been jealous of Danielle since they were girls. How she'd pursued Marcus out of spite as much as desire. Danielle listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the edge of the dresser. Part of her wanted to hang up. Part of her needed to hear every last sordid detail. The husband said Anna was begging for forgiveness she didn't deserve. He sounded as hollowed out as Danielle had once been. She's been saying she'll do something drastic, he added quietly. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice cracked, and she realized he was just another casualty of Anna's chaos. Danielle closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't responsible for Anna's unraveling, but she also couldn't pretend she didn't care. After she hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the waves outside. She thought about all the years she and Anna had been inseparable. The sleepovers, the whispered secrets, the promises to always be there for each other. How had it come to this? Two women wrecked by the same men and the same betrayal. But even as sorrow welled up in her, Danielle felt a strange relief. She finally knew the truth, stripped of excuses. Anna hadn't stolen Marcus because she loved him. She'd done it because she couldn't stand to see Danielle happy. It didn't make it easier, but it made it make sense. She folded her clothes slowly, with a new kind of calm. Whatever Anna chose to do next, it wouldn't define her anymore. Danielle's story was her own now, and no confession or apology could ever take that away from her. Danielle returned home a week later, stepping into a house that felt both familiar and foreign. The walls still held the memories, but they no longer had power over her. She walked room to room, touching the furniture like she was saying goodbye to the version of herself who had lived there, the woman who'd been blind to betrayal, the woman who had loved too trustingly. She spent the next days cleaning out closets and drawers. Every photo of Marcus and Anna went into a box. She didn't burn them. She wasn't interested in revenge. She simply refused to keep ghosts on display. When the box was full, she sealed it shut and slid it into the attic, out of sight, out of her heart. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook. She began to write her story, not the one Marcus or Anna had tried to shape, but her own truth. Each page felt like another brick laid in the foundation of a life she was finally building on her terms. She wrote until her hand cramped, and then she wrote some more. When she finished the last sentence, Danielle closed the notebook and set it aside. She felt lighter, almost. She knew there would still be hard days ahead, moments when grief and anger resurfaced, but she also knew she'd never again let someone else's choices define her worth. That part of her life was over. In the months that followed, she started to smile without forcing it. She took long walks in the mornings and treated herself to flowers for no reason at all. She even began to imagine that someday she might open her heart again, but this time she would choose someone who valued loyalty as fiercely as she did. On the anniversary of the day she discovered the affair, Danielle invited a few close friends over. They toasted to resilience, to fresh starts, to the kind of love that begins inside yourself. As the laughter filled her kitchen, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and it felt good. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because next time, we're sharing the story of a woman who discovered her husband had a secret family, and how she turned her heartbreak into something unstoppable. You won't want to miss it. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay on her side of the bed, listening to Daniel's breathing, wondering how many nights he'd lain beside her with that secret pressing on his chest. She thought about every time he'd looked her in the eye and told her he loved her. She wondered if any of it had been true, or if love could exist alongside so many lies. In the early hours, she got up and padded to the kitchen. Lily was sitting at the table, knees drawn up to her chest, a glass of water untouched in front of her. She looked up as Claire entered, her eyes red and swollen. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt as fragile as porcelain. Finally, Lily broke it with a voice so soft it barely reached across the table. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't know, he never told you. Her words were sincere, and something in them cracked open a door. Claire hadn't expected a door to compassion. No matter how much pain she felt, this child was blameless. She had lost her mother, and now stood on the edge of losing something else she didn't yet understand. Claire sat across from her, studying the girl's face. There was a resemblance to Daniel's mouth, his eyes, proof of what she'd lost and what he'd hidden. I'm not angry at you, Claire said, her voice breaking, but I don't know what to do with this. Lily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and wiped them away with the back of her hand. The kitchen clock ticked on, marking each second that passed between them. Claire realized she had a choice. She could let this become the story that ruined her, or the one that taught her how to survive. But she didn't have an answer yet. All she had was the dull, hollow ache in her chest, and the girl in front of her who needed someone to hold on to. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching them. He looked older than she had ever seen him. Claire, he began, but she lifted a hand to stop him. Not tonight. She wasn't ready to hear anything more from him. Not when every word felt like another crack in the life she thought she'd built. She turned back to Lily and whispered, "Go get some sleep. Tomorrow, we'll talk." The girl nodded and slipped down the hall, leaving Claire alone in the kitchen, staring at the ghost of a marriage she no longer recognized. The next morning, Claire felt hollowed out, as if she'd cried every ounce of feeling from her body. She made coffee out of habit and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth she couldn't feel. Daniel sat across from her, his gaze flicking up and down like he couldn't decide where to look. For a while, they said nothing, and that silence was heavier than any argument. Finally, he cleared his throat and slid an envelope across the table. "I wrote this before you knew," he said. "I wanted you to have it, even if I couldn't say it." She stared at the envelope, her name scrawled in the handwriting she used to love, then picked it up as if it might burn her fingers. In her office, she sat at her old oak desk, the letter unopened in her lap. She traced the edges, remembering birthdays and anniversaries when that handwriting had meant love, not betrayal. It took her an hour to gather the courage to break the seal. When she finally unfolded the paper, Daniel's words spilled out in uneven lines. He wrote about the affair, the guilt, the nights he lay awake beside her thinking he'd confess and never finding the strength. He wrote about Lily's mother, about how it hadn't been just a fling but something he never planned to tell because he'd convinced himself it would end. He ended with an apology, one he admitted would never be enough. Claire read it 3 times, the words blurring until they stopped meaning anything. She folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope, as if that could contain the damage. She set it in the top drawer of her desk and closed it softly. Later, she found Lily sitting in the sunroom, legs tucked beneath her, reading a book. The girl looked up with cautious hope. Claire's heart ached again, not just for herself, but for this child caught in the wreckage of Daniel's choices. Claire sat beside her and said quietly, "I don't have all the answers, but you're not alone in this house." Lily blinked, fast, and for the first time, a small, shy smile crossed her face. It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. A week later, Claire was folding laundry when she heard a knock at the front door. She almost ignored it. She wasn't in the mood for neighbors' pity, but something in the quiet, hesitant rhythm made her pause. When she opened the door, a woman stood on the porch, clutching a worn leather handbag against her chest. "I'm sorry to come here," the woman said, voice trembling. I'm Lily's mother." Her hair was the same dark auburn as Lily's, and her eyes darted from Claire's face to the floor. "I thought you deserved to see me." Claire felt the air thicken between them. She wanted to slam the door. She wanted to scream, but she just stood frozen, hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. The woman introduced herself. "Viva," she explained that Daniel had promised he would tell Claire the truth before Lily ever came to live with them. He'd sworn he'd make it right, but he never did. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Eva whispered. "I just needed you to know I didn't want her to grow up without family." Claire gestured for her to come inside, surprising even herself. They sat across from each other in the living room, the walls suddenly too close, the air too thin. Eva pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. "These are the guardianship papers. I'm not here to take her back. I'm dying." The words landed like a stone. Claire felt her own breath falter. She looked at the woman's hollow cheeks, the way she swallowed hard between sentences. In that moment, she saw not an enemy but another mother, just as tired, just as broken. I didn't know who else to trust, Eva said, voice breaking. She's all I have. Claire's throat burned with 1,000 things she wanted to say, accusations, curses, grief, but instead, she whispered, I understand. Because, in a way, she did. Lily stood at the edge of the hallway, eyes wide. She didn't speak, but when Eva reached out, Lily took her hand, trembling. It was the quietest moment Claire had ever witnessed, and the most heartbreaking, after Eva left. The house felt heavier than before. Claire sat at the kitchen table, the guardianship papers spread out in front of her. The words blurred and reformed as she tried to process everything. She felt like she was living someone else's life, one where nothing was predictable and every truth had sharp edges. Lily sat across from her, legs swinging off the chair, her small hands clasped tight. Is she really sick? She asked in a small voice. Claire nodded, unsure how much to say. She doesn't have much time, she managed. Lily didn't cry. She just looked down, her hair falling like a curtain around her face. Claire reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand over Lily's. It was the first time she'd touched her since the revelation. For a moment, neither of them moved. There was a strange comfort in the contact, like they were both admitting they needed something from each other, something neither fully understood yet. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner, Claire whispered. Lily looked up, her eyes rimmed with red. Are you going to send me away? The question cut deeper than anything Daniel had done. Claire shook her head. No, you're staying here. You're part of this family. The promise felt enormous, but also right. Claire didn't know if she had it in her to love Lily the way she deserved, but she knew she couldn't turn her away. Maybe love wasn't something that appeared all at once. Maybe it was built, moment by moment, in the spaces between pain and forgiveness. Later that night, she called her sister and told her everything. She expected judgment, or at least disbelief. But instead, her sister sighed and said, You're stronger than you think. Claire didn't feel strong. She felt like she was patching together a life she never asked for. When she finally went upstairs, Lily was asleep on top of the covers, clutching the stuffed rabbit Claire had bought her months ago. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. I promise I'll try, she whispered to the darkness. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe that would be enough. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to Claire, in handwriting she didn't recognize. She tore it open at the kitchen counter, her heart already bracing for whatever new revelation might be inside. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, something soft and nostalgic that reminded her of old family photographs. It was from Eva. In it, she wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness. She only wanted Lily to have a chance to grow up without secrets. You have every right to hate me, the letter read in delicate script, but please don't let her believe she was a mistake. Claire read that line over and over, her throat tightening. She sat down, pressing the letter flat against the table. How many times had she wished Daniel would have left something like this, a confession, an explanation, anything but the silence he'd wrapped around them all. But here it was, in Ava's words, not an excuse, but a final act of love for her daughter. Claire folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of a kitchen drawer. She didn't know if she'd ever show it to Lily. Maybe someday, when the girl was older, when all the wounds had faded to scars. Maybe then, it would feel like a gift instead of another cut. That night, she sat with Lily on the sofa, the television flickering in the dark. Neither of them spoke much. But when Lily leaned her head against Claire's arm, Claire let it stay there. The contact was tentative, but it was real. And in its own way, it felt like the start of something they hadn't dared hope for. In bed, Claire replayed the words of the letter in her mind. Please don't let her believe she was a mistake. She wondered if she could ever give Lily that certainty, if she could ever give it to herself. But as she closed her eyes, she thought of the promise she'd made to try. Maybe that was all any of them could do. Try to love, try to forgive, try to build something whole from the pieces left behind. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Claire and Lily developed an unspoken truce. The questions about Daniel no longer fell like knives. They came in softer, halting sentences, as if Lily were testing the air, and each time, Claire tried to answer honestly, without bitterness that could poison them both. One afternoon, Claire found Lily sitting on the porch, tracing circles on the wooden railing with her fingertip. She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. Did he ever love me? She asked. her voice so small it almost disappeared in the breeze. Claire's chest ached. She didn't know how to tell her daughter the whole story without breaking her again. She sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I think he loved you the best way he knew how," she whispered. "But that wasn't always the way you deserved." Lily nodded, silent tears running down her cheeks. The sun was setting behind them, turning the yard gold, and for the first time, Claire realized that healing didn't look like forgetting. It looked like this, just staying, even when the truth was messy. Later that evening, Claire picked up the phone and called Ava's number. It rang 4 times before voicemail clicked on. She didn't leave a message. She didn't know what she'd even say. There were no words big enough to bridge what they'd all done to each other. But she felt something she hadn't before, an unfamiliar loosening, like a rope coming untied. She couldn't change the past, but maybe she could keep it from dictating everything that came after. In the kitchen, Lily was making herself a sandwich. She looked up when Claire entered, and their eyes met. There was still pain there, but also something softer. Recognition. The understanding that they were both survivors of the same betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, that could be the start of a new kind of family, one built on truth instead of lies. A week later, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Claire almost threw it away, thinking it was another bill or some pointless advertisement. But when she opened it, her hands started to shake. It was from Daniel, written months earlier, before he left, before everything fell apart. His handwriting was careful, as if he knew this might be the last thing he'd ever say to her. He confessed he'd felt trapped between who he was and who she needed him to be, that he'd been afraid to tell her the truth about his doubts, his failures, his secrets, and that he'd failed her more than once. But he ended the letter with a single sentence that caught in her throat. "If you hate me, I understand. But please, don't let Lily hate herself." Claire read it 3 times, trying to feel something: anger, relief, forgiveness. But all she felt was tired. Tired of carrying his guilt on her shoulders. Tired of wondering what might have been different if he'd spoken sooner. And tired of letting his choices overshadow her own. She folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer she rarely opened. Maybe one day she'd show Lily. Maybe not. Some truths were better left in the past, buried like old bones. But even as she shut the drawer, a small part of her felt lighter. She didn't owe him anything anymore. Not her sorrow, not her rage. That night, she dreamed she was standing in a field of tall grass, the wind rushing over her skin. In the dream, she was alone, but she wasn't afraid. She woke before dawn, her pillow damp with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. In the darkness, she sat up, pressed a hand to her chest, and whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time in a long while, she believed that was enough. Spring came early that year. The trees outside Claire's window burst into bloom, white petals drifting across the porch like confetti. She woke each morning to birdsong instead of dread, and for the first time in months, she realized she no longer checked the driveway to see if Daniel's car had returned. She no longer wondered if she was enough. She simply was. One afternoon, she sat with Lily in the kitchen, a pot of chamomile tea between them. The little girl was coloring, humming a tune under her breath. Claire watched her daughter's small, steady hands and felt something bloom in her chest, something that wasn't pain. It was a fragile, hopeful peace. She decided they would be okay, not perfect, not untouched by sorrow, but okay. And in that quiet acceptance, she found the strength to plan a future without resentment as its foundation. She would build something new, a life that belonged to them alone, without shadows clinging to every corner. When Lily looked up and asked, "Mommy, are you happy again?" Claire didn't flinch. She smiled and said, "Yes, sweetheart. I'm finding my happy, one day at a time." And Lily's grin was all the proof she needed that she was on the right path. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Claire stepped onto the porch and watched the stars appear. She thought of all the nights she'd spent wondering what she'd done wrong. But as she stood there, breathing the cool spring air, she finally understood. Some endings aren't punishments. They're invitations. Invitations to grow, to heal, to rediscover who you were before you were broken. And as the night settled around her, Claire closed her eyes and whispered a quiet promise to herself. This is just the beginning. If you've made it this far, I want you to know this. Sometimes the people we trust most are the very ones who teach us how strong we really are. Claire never asked to be betrayed. She never asked for the life she built to fall apart. But when it did, she discovered a kind of courage she didn't know existed. Maybe you see a little of yourself in her story. Maybe you've felt that same ache in your chest, the same questions that keep you up at night. If you have, let this be your reminder that you are not defined by who leaves or who lies. You are defined by what you choose to do next. Claire chose to rise, to protect her daughter, to rebuild, even when she had every reason to give up. And in doing so, she proved that no betrayal can steal your worth unless you let it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Give this video a like and share it with someone who might need these words today. And if you have a story of your own, a story of loss, resilience, or redemptions, send it to me. I'm Brenda, and here, your voice matters, because in our next story, you'll meet a woman who discovered her husband's second family on the day of his funeral. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.